Have you ever wondered what would happen if all of the Straw Hats joined the Marines? How powerful would they become in this scenario? And most importantly, would they be able to catch some of the world's most dangerous pirates? Okay, so the main difference in this scenario would be that Garp would spend way more time with Luffy during his childhood. This would mean Garp would also have more time to train the boy, putting him through the same training regimen as in the main story. Another big difference in this version would be that Garp would be the one to save Luffy from the mountain bandit instead of Shanks, since he would be around at the time. After this incident, Luffy would completely change his stance on pirates and Marines, starting to idolize Garp instead of Shanks. Now, before I explain exactly how Luffy and the others would actually end up joining the Marines, I want to tell you guys about Opera GX, the sponsor of today's video. Are you bored of your browser looking plain and boring like this? Would you rather have it look flashy and cool like mine? Well, Opera GX is here to help. The easiest way to do this is by heading to the GX store. Here you can find a bunch of cool mods that completely change your browsing experience. And guys, these mods don't just change your wallpaper, they change literally everything, like background music, keyboard sounds, browser animations, UI, icons, and there are even shaders that can change your entire screen. But if you want to customize it even more, you can also choose which mods to enable or disable in the mods menu on the sidebar. The coolest thing about Opera GX is that it has both a VPN and ad block already built in. This can make your browsing much smoother, and the VPN can also let you watch anime that isn't available in your country. Another great thing about Opera GX is that you can separate a video from your browser by clicking this button here. This is so useful because you can watch your favorite anime while doing other stuff like working or studying. And if all of this sounds cool to you, you can easily import all the settings from your previous browser by going to Browser Settings, Synchronization, Import Bookmarks and Settings, and that's it. Click my link in the description to download Opera GX now and stop using your boring browser today. When Garp eventually leaves Luffy to live with the Don, Luffy would absolutely hate it, since he wouldn't want to live with a bunch of criminals. Despite not liking his current situation, Luffy would at least have his brothers, Ace and Sabo, for company. Considering that they both want to become pirates, they wouldn't like Luffy at first, but over time, all of the kids would begin showing mutual respect for each other. Living with bandits, watching both of his brothers dream of becoming pirates, and learning more about the Marines thanks to Garp's influence, this version of Luffy would be very confused about the kind of person he wants to be. However, things would become clear to him when he comes face to face with Blue Jam and his crew. After seeing the evils some pirates are capable of, Luffy would decide in his heart that he will become a Marine and protect the innocent. Eventually, Luffy would lose Sabo to a celestial dragon, which would spark a deep hatred inside him for the world government and the people at the top. After a long talk with Garp about changing the system from within, Luffy would decide to leave home and join his grandfather to officially begin training as a Marine. Sailing over to the G77 base, Luffy would settle into his new home and begin his early hockey training under Garp and Bogart. Due to being extremely talented, Luffy would easily learn the basics, which would surprise the rest of his class. At one point, Garp would decide to take Luffy to the Grand Line so he can meet more pirates and learn more about the world. This is where Luffy would meet both Vice Admiral Jinbei and one of the Marines' finest mechanics, Frankie. But wait, how did this happen? You see, in this scenario, after Jinbei became captain of the Sun Pirates, he managed to convince King Neptune to have Fishman Island become a member of the world government. He then decided to join the Marines and rise through the ranks to show the world that fishmen and humans can fight alongside each other. When it comes to Frankie, he decided to join the Marines to meet his idol, Dr. Vegapunk. Given his talent for building things, the Marines immediately accepted him, and he became one of the world government's best mechanics. Luffy would grow to respect both Jinbei and Frankie a lot, and would vow to one day become as strong and smart as them. Once Luffy finally turned 17, Garp would decide it is the perfect time to send him out on his first solo mission, which would be to visit the Shellstown Marine base for an inspection. So Garp would drop Luffy off at the Goa Kingdom and tell him to use everything he has learned to find his way around. There would only be one problem though. Garp would forget to give him a ship. Over the next couple of days, Luffy would spend his time talking to the locals until he finds someone willing to spare him a raft for his trip to the next next island. However, as soon as Luffy leaves the shore, he would come face to face with the Sea King that attacked him and his grandfather all those years ago. Determined to get his payback, Luffy would defeat the monster in one blow, using his hockey-covered fists. But despite all of his tactical training as a Marine, Luffy would still get caught in a whirlpool, even in this scenario, and end up on Alvida's ship. After taking down everyone on board, Luffy would make friends with Kobe and tell him to take them both to Shell's Town. There, Luffy would soon meet a mysterious swordsman tied to a pole. After witnessing Helmeppo stomp on the food brought by a little girl, Luffy would immediately jump in and punch him, not caring at all who he is. Luffy would then order the Marines present to immediately call the base's captain. After Luffy reveals that he was sent there to inspect the base, Morgan would become furious and attempt to kill him. Instead of backing down, Luffy would drive Morgan straight into the ground with a kick, and then take over the base. Right after this, he would contact Garp using a mini Den Mushi to give him an update about his mission. Over the next few days, Zoro would see the way Luffy disciplines the other Marines and the way he cares about the townspeople above all else. This would make Zoro respect Luffy quite a bit. Knowing that Mihawk is a warlord who works for the Marines, Zoro would decide to enlist as well, hoping that this would help him meet and challenge the world's strongest swordsman. Soon enough, Garp would arrive to take Axe Hand Morgan to Impel Down and congratulate Luffy on completing his mission. He would also tell Luffy that his job in the East Blue isn't done yet, since a lot of nearby islands are controlled by pirates who need to be brought to justice. Wasting no time, Luffy would take Zoro with him while leaving Kobe and Helmeppo with Garp to train. The next day, Luffy and Zoro would arrive at Orange Town, where they would meet Nami. Realizing that Nami is a pirate because of her tattoo, the duo would attempt to catch her, but they would get lured straight to Buggy's base. From here, Luffy and Zoro would easily defeat Buggy and his crew and put them under arrest. However, just as this is happening, Luffy and Zoro would see Nami escaping on their ship, mocking them for not being able to catch her. Feeling humiliated, Luffy and Zoro would quickly take one of Buggy's ships and attempt to follow her. Now, considering this is Luffy and Zoro we're talking about here, they would soon get lost and end up in Syrup Village. They would decide to rest there for a bit and ask the locals for directions. It's here that they would meet Usopp, who would immediately ask for their help dealing with Captain Kuro. Considering Luffy is much stronger in this version of the story, he and Zoro would quickly deal with Kuro. Usopp would be inspired by Luffy's heroics after the fight and would start respecting Luffy's determination to help people. Eventually, wanting to be different from his dad who abandoned him, Usopp would ask Luffy to let him join the Marines and help him on his journey. Seeing Usopp's sniping skills, Luffy would decide to hand him a gun and welcome him on board. Trying to find their way back to the nearest Marine base, Luffy and his squad would soon end up near Baratie. There, Luffy would watch Sanji kick Captain Fullbody, but he wouldn't do anything about it since Fullbody is kind of a jerk. Seeing Sanji's skills, Luffy would ask him to become a Marine, but Sanji would obviously refuse. Eventually, Don Krieg and his crew would show up, and Luffy would offer to deal with the situation himself. Things would go mostly the same from here, with Luffy dealing with Krieg and Mihawk arriving soon after. Zoro would ask Luffy if he can challenge Mihawk, but Luffy would tell him now is not the time since Mihawk is a warlord protected by the world government. Determined to prove himself, Zoro would disregard Luffy's orders and would be beaten by Mihawk the same way he was in the original story. Despite this, Luffy would forgive Zoro and make him promise that he won't do anything like that again. Seeing how determined Zoro is to achieve his dream would move something inside Sanji, and he would decide to join Luffy in hopes of achieving his dream as well. Soon, Luffy's squad would arrive at Kokoyashi Village to deal with the last remaining pirate in the East Blue, Arlong. Seeing the Marines approach, Arlong would send some of his fishmen to ambush them, but they would all be defeated easily. While exploring the village, the squad would learn about what's been happening there and would find Nami crying nearby. Realizing that Nami isn't actually a bad person, Luffy would decide not to arrest her and would turn his attention to Arlong instead. He would then fight Arlong one-on-one while Zoro, Sanji, and Usopp deal with the others. During the fight, Luffy would tell Arlong that it's still not too late for him and he can still choose the right path, just like Jinbei. Hearing Jinbei's name would enrage Arlong, and he would rush at Luffy with everything he has. Seeing that Arlong can't be convinced, Luffy would decide to finish the fight with a strong armament hockey punch. After arresting Arlong's entire crew, Luffy would take the captives on board and recruit Nami in the process. Nami would decide to join the Marines to make sure that what happened to her town never happens again. Together, they would sail to Logue Town, where Luffy would meet Smoker and the two would get along surprisingly well. After dropping off the Arlong pirates there, Luffy and his crew would sail across the Calm Belt to report back to Garp at the G2 base. After regrouping there for a few days, Luffy would suddenly get a call from his pal Smoker, who would ask for his help in dealing with some Baroque Works agents. So, Luffy's squad would follow Smoker's lead lead and go to Whiskey Peak to investigate. There, they would face off against the 100 bounty hunters. They would also meet Vivi, who would tell Luffy about Crocodile and how he plans to take over her kingdom. Now, considering that the government was already fed up with Crocodile and his actions, they would actually allow Luffy to arrest him. However, Luffy and Smoker would have to go there without any backup so they don't raise suspicion. On their way there, they would make a brief stop on Little Garden to rest, which would result in Nami getting sick. With no doctor on board, Luffy's squad would be forced to dock on Drum Island to look for one. Near the shore, they would run into Wapol. However, this time, instead of trying to fight Luffy, Wapol would begin ordering him around. Since Wapol is officially the king, Luffy would have no choice but to listen to him for now. So, the crew would escort Wapol and his army back to the island, where they would find Dalton protecting one of the local villages. Watching Wapol terrify and make fun of the people around him, Luffy would choose to stop following orders and break Marine protocol. Wapol would immediately start threatening him, but Luffy wouldn't care and would just continue looking for a doctor on his own. This would eventually lead him to Chopper and Kureha, which would play out the same as in the original story. Upon his return from the castle, Luffy would find Wapol's men about to kill Dalton and Zoro for defending the town. Losing his cool, Luffy would punch the lights out of Wapol and encourage the people to elect a new leader. Seeing this, Chopper would be inspired and would ask to enlist in the Marines too. Kureha would also be happy about this, since it would be the perfect chance for Chopper to help more people while staying on the right side of the law. With a doctor on board, Luffy's crew would set sail straight for Alabasta. While on the way, they would meet up with Smoker's platoon and share information with each other. Vivi would then help them form a plan to make sure they handle things carefully and prevent a civil war from breaking out. Once in Alabasta, Luffy would meet Ace. At first, Luffy would chase Ace around to capture him and convince him to join the Marines, but he would give up once his brother makes it clear that isn't gonna happen. The two would then spend some time together, with Luffy telling Ace to leave the island since something big is about to happen. After this little reunion, Luffy would get in contact with Smoker, and both groups would decide to conduct a raid on Crocodile's base. Together, they would infiltrate the casino, but they would end up falling for Crocodile's trap. After listening to his evil speech, they would desperately search for a way out until Sanji and Chopper come and save them. Luffy would then sprint out of the casino and catch up to Crocodile, while Smoker takes the rest of the forces to try and stop the civil war. Considering Luffy knows hockey, the battle between him and Crocodile would go completely differently compared to the original story, with Luffy easily breaking through his Logia form and bringing him down. Meanwhile, Smoker's group would fight the rest of Baroque Works and successfully manage to locate the bomb before it goes off. With all that done, Luffy and his group would bring all the arrested criminals on board and make their way to the G2 base to report to Garp. However, they would fail to notice that someone else has boarded their ship in secret. Passing next to Water 7, they would decide to stop and get some supplies. There, Luffy would share with his new recruits that he knows the guy who helped build the sea train they spotted earlier. Anyway, while the others are off shopping for supplies, Luffy and Nami would decide to stay back to plan the journey ahead. However, they would soon be interrupted by someone trying to escape the ship. Thinking it's one of the prisoners, Luffy would jump on them, only to realize that it is actually Robin. Instead of fighting him, Robin would surrender and beg Luffy not to arrest her, since the government would probably kill her. After listening to her story, Luffy would realize that she is actually a good person and would promise that nothing bad would happen to her. However, the next morning, Robin would go missing. The crew would then learn that Iceberg has been attacked and that Robin was somehow involved in it. Luffy would feel personally responsible for allowing Robin to escape and would immediately order his team to go out and find her. This would eventually lead Luffy and Zoro to Iceberg's mansion, where they would find Robin along with the CP9 agents. Luffy would try to figure out what's going on, but instead of explaining anything, Blue No would instantly try to kill him. Using Haki, Luffy would easily dodge and then punch Blue No into the wall. Frustrated by this, Lucci would step in and punch Zoro straight through the window. Lucci would then briefly engage Luffy in battle before eventually escaping with Robin. Considering Luffy has already listened to Robin's story before, he would know it's likely that CP9 took her. So, not knowing what to do, he would contact Garp to ask for advice. Hearing the name CP9, Garp would ask Luffy not to get involved, but Luffy would tell him that he promised to keep Robin safe, and he has to keep that promise. At first, Garp would get annoyed at Luffy and call him stupid, but he would also be proud of his grandson. He would then tell Luffy that there is a way he can help Robin while still being in the Marines, and that would be by joining a group called Sword. After explaining the situation to his group, everyone would make the decision to join Sword and become independent Marines. Sending in their resignation letters the next day, they would all board the Puffing Tom and decide to head straight for Impel Down, where Robin is being held. Once there, Luffy would learn from the prison guards that he has been promoted to Vice Admiral for his efforts in taking down Crocodile. Luffy would be super happy about this, as it means he is now on the same level as his grandfather. Luffy would then request to visit Robin and would soon be taken to her cell. It's here that Luffy would explain to Robin that the only way he can protect her is if she agrees to join his Marine squad and work under the world government. Seeing someone actually try to help her for the first time, Robin would burst into tears and accept the offer. Just in time, Garp and Aokiji would also arrive at the prison, and considering Aokiji is an admiral, he would command the guards to immediately release Robin. Back at headquarters, Luffy's decision to recruit Robin would be met with a lot of resistance, but both Garp and Aokiji would be there to defend Luffy's decision. And continuing their journey back to base from Impel Down, the crew would accidentally get stuck in the Florian Triangle, where they would meet Brook. Thriller Bark would go mostly the same way, with Luffy defeating Moria to get Brook's shadow back after learning about everything the Warlord has done. Brook would then agree to enlist in Luffy's platoon, and the entire team would finally make it back to the Marine base. Meeting his grandfather again, Luffy and his recruits would be greeted with a huge amount of praise from the rest of the Marines. He would be awarded medals, and they would throw a party to make his new promotion official. Luffy would also introduce his new platoon members to Jinbei, Frankie, Kobe, and Helmeppo. All of them would then spend a few days together before something big happens. You see, even though the Straw Hats are Marines in this timeline, it doesn't mean every event in the story would suddenly change. For example, Blackbeard would still carry out his plan to become a warlord, and that would inevitably lead to Ace getting arrested. After learning that the Marines planned to execute his brother, Luffy would be shaken to his very core. He would instantly try to argue with the higher-ups about Ace's fate, claiming that he is mostly a peaceful pirate and doesn't deserve a punishment like this. However, nobody would really listen to him. Garp would then inform Luffy that he and his team would have to participate too and help the others fend off the Whitebeard pirates. In the following week, before the war starts, Luffy would decide to visit Ace in Impel Down. Their meeting would go well at first, with Ace expressing his pride in Luffy. However, things would get heated when Luffy loses his cool and starts yelling at Ace about how he should have joined the Marines instead of becoming a pirate. He would eventually break down in tears, and both of them would start reminiscing about the old days when they were just stupid kids in the East Blue. Soon, the day of the Marineford War would arrive. Jinbei and Frankie would decide to accompany Luffy and his team on this mission to provide even more support. The war would begin in the same brutal way it did before, only this time, Luffy would be on the front lines for the Marines instead of the pirates. Barely able to keep up with the likes of Marco and Jozu, Luffy and his crew would manage to hold them back from reaching the main execution platform. During the battle, Zoro would team up with Mihawk and get a quick lesson on how to send out long-range slashing attacks. Meanwhile, Sanji and Kizaru would take on Marco, with both of them teaming up to deliver devastating high-speed kicks. This would be a great learning experience for Sanji, which would help him become much stronger since he and Kizaru have a somewhat similar fighting style. When it comes to Nami and Robin, he would stay close to Tsuru and try to learn as much as possible from the veteran Marine. Frankie, Jinbei, and Brook would work together to tackle Little Oars Jr. and successfully bring him down. On the other hand, Chopper would spend this entire war trying to patch up his fellow Marines, with Kobe bringing him every injured person he could find on the battlefield. Out of everyone present during the war, Luffy would realize that his performance is the worst, which would make him increasingly frustrated. So, wanting to prove himself, he would transform into Gear 3 and challenge Whitebeard head-on. He would get swatted away like a bug. Injured on the side of the battlefield, Luffy would be able to do nothing but think about Ace and whether there is any way to save him. Moments later, Ace's execution would finally start. Swayed by his emotions, Luffy would try to stop the execution once again in front of everyone and plead for Ace's life. With nobody listening to him, Luffy would start getting angry, but Garp would arrive just in time to hold his grandson down so he doesn't do anything stupid. With both grandfather and grandson crying in the middle of a war, Luffy would try to free himself by releasing a sharp burst of Conqueror's Haki. Yet, despite this, Ace's execution would go as planned, with Luffy ultimately unable to do anything about it. The war would end soon after, with Blackbeard stealing Whitebeard's fruit and Shanks calming everyone down. In the following weeks, Luffy would be furious about Garp not doing anything to stop the execution, but deep down, he would know that Garp made the right choice. He would then make it his goal to train even harder than before and surpass his grandfather so that he can never hold him down again. The Straw Hat Squad would grow pretty close after the war, with everyone coming together to support Luffy, including Jinbei and Frankie. After hearing Luffy's desire to grow stronger, all of them would make a pact to grow stronger as soon as possible. For the next 2 years, everyone would decide to go their separate ways stories on missions that help them grow as Marines. For example, Usopp would join a special marksman training regiment with the Marines and help deal with pirates in the West Blue. He would eventually meet Hibari there after Kobe saves her during the Rocky Port incident. Zoro would train under Mihawk after the two of them got to know each other during the war. Meanwhile, Nami and Robin would form a special task force with Vice Admiral Tsuru, Vice Admiral Dahl, and Vice Admiral Bluegrass to free slaves and battle pirates across the South Blue. Sanji would go a different route by training directly under Admiral Kizaru and escorting him on dangerous missions, which would also involve trips to Egghead Island to visit Vegapunk. Chopper would work with Frankie to further improve his medical technology and would be instrumental in helping the Marines recover after the war. Brook and Jinbei would form a close bond during the time skip and become special envoys to Fishman Island. Frankie would spend the 2 years upgrading his body and building a special ship for their squad. Meanwhile, Luffy would decide that the only way to best his grandfather is to learn from the man himself. So he would join a training squad with Kobe and Helmeppo, learning how to use advanced haki and punching holes in huge battleships. Eventually, Aokiji would leave the Marines after his fight against Akainu. Along with him, Sengoku and Garp would both choose to retire following the war. After 2 years of intense, non-stop training, Luffy would be an absolute monster when it comes to raw strength. He would now have the power to level entire cities with a single punch, similar to Garp. Due to learning advanced haki early, Luffy would be much stronger than he was after his training with Rayleigh in the original story. Also, after being sent out on several missions for Sword to take down the supernovas, he would come out with many new attacks and develop Gear 4th along the way. During these missions, he would manage to arrest a bunch of supernovas like Apu, Hawkins, and Uruge, who had no chance of competing with him. By age 19, he would have already taken down every up-and-coming rookie pirate who dared to enter the Grand Line, including Cavendish and Bartolomeo. However, here comes the most important part. Luffy would actually be promoted to the Admiral position after the time skip. Okay, let me explain. You see, even though Marine HQ would have already picked Fujitora as a replacement for Aokiji, they would still need one more Admiral to fill Akainu's spot. Green Bull would be another contender, so Akainu would have Luffy and Green Bull fight for the position. Now, although Green Bull is incredibly strong, with advanced haki and all of the skills he learned from Garp, Luffy should be able to defeat him. This would officially make him a Marine Admiral, one of the 3 strongest Marine soldiers in the world. Upon hearing the news of his promotion, the others would slowly begin returning to the new Marineford to report back. Each member of Luffy's platoon would be a lot stronger than they originally were, just like in the original timeline. Robin, Nami, Sanji, and Zoro would be Vice Admirals at this point, while Usopp, Brook, and Chopper would be promoted to Rear Admirals. Since Luffy is an Admiral now and doesn't really have to listen to orders, he would set his sights on the new world and would want to bring the most dangerous pirates to justice. Soon, he would receive information from Smoker about an abandoned Marine lab on Punk Hazard that seems to be used by someone. Assembling his old squad again, Luffy would immediately head there to investigate. On the way, the squad would learn that children nearby have gone missing and that these two things might be related. Luffy's mission on Punk Hazard would go smoothly, especially since Frankie would already be very familiar with the lab's layout. Luffy's squad would quickly save the kids before inevitably catching Caesar. While there, they would also come into contact with Kinemon and Momonosuke and put them both under Marine protection. After some interrogation by Frankie and Zoro, Caesar would eventually admit that Doflamingo is the mastermind behind this whole thing. Anyway, considering Doflamingo is a warlord, Luffy would decide to play it smart. First, he would talk to Fujitora about it, and the two would agree to try and abolish the warlord system. So, they would wait for the Revery to happen and officially present their plan to everyone. Since there would now be 2 admirals supporting the plan, it would pass immediately, and all warlords around the world would be labeled as criminals. While at Marijoa, Luffy would also help the Marines fend off the Revolutionary Army during their invasion. There, he would meet Sabo for the first time since they were kids. Although Luffy would capture quite a few Revolutionary Army members, seeing Sabo would make him immediately lose focus, allowing the revolutionaries to escape. Obviously, Luffy would get yelled at by Akainu because of this, with both him and Fujitora getting banned from entering any Marine facility ever again until they catch Sabo. However, they wouldn't really care about this, since they already set their sights on Doflamingo, as they finally have permission to capture him. Traveling straight to Dressrosa, Luffy's ship would get attacked immediately on arrival by Doflamingo's main forces. It would only be a short battle, however, since Luffy's squad would be far too strong for anything Doflamingo can throw at them. Infiltrating the island with an army of Marines, Luffy and his squad would easily take over the entire country and start marching toward the castle to bring Doflamingo down. Along the way, the Marines would dismantle every smile factory they can find and liberate the Tontada slaves. From there, Brook and Usopp would easily take down Sugar and Treble, while Zoro and Sanji would defeat pretty much everyone else to clear the path for Luffy. Chopper, Nami, and Robin would mostly be in charge of making sure civilians are safe and protected. Soon, Luffy would engage Doflamingo, who would cast the birdcage over the entire island. However, nothing would be able to save him from Admiral Luffy's hockey-coated fists. As Fujitora locks Doflamingo in place using his gravity powers, Luffy would pummel the warlord into minced meat and brutally knock him out. After this short fight, Luffy would promptly apologize to the people of Dressrosa for the Marines' inaction for so long and promise that something like this would never happen again. Luffy would then spend the next week arguing with Fleet Admiral Akainu over his knowledge of Doflamingo's operation and over the fact that the Marines and world government allowed him to stay in power. In the end, Luffy would tell Akainu that he will catch every evil pirate in the new world, even the Emperor's. Thinking about his next move, Luffy would remember Kinemon and Momonosuke's story about Kaido. After talking to them again and learning all the bad things Kaido has done to the people of Wano, Luffy would finally decide it's time to take down this evil emperor. So, after a few weeks of planning, Luffy's entire squad, along with some sword members and Fujitora, would set sail for Wano. With Kinemon's knowledge of the region's landscape, Luffy and his team would quickly advance through Wano, taking down many beast pirates in the process. Fujitora would personally lead a squad with Chopper and invade Udon to free the people imprisoned there and arrest Queen. This would severely weaken Kaido's forces and also rally a lot of people to fight with the Marines to free their country. Meanwhile, Luffy would set his sights on Onigashima and lead his squad there to take on anything that remains of the beast pirates. Along the way, Luffy's team would deal with the Tobiropo and the remaining All-Stars, clearing the way for their captain. Fujitora and the other sword members would also arrive to help, telling Luffy to go on and arrest Kaido. So, Luffy would head straight for the rooftop, where he would discover Kaido trying to strangle Momonosuke in front of an unconscious Kinemon. Immediately taking action, Luffy would activate Gear Force and engage Kaido head-on, splitting the sky in the process. Considering Luffy already knows advanced hockey at this point, this fight would be pretty even, with both of them giving it their all. Landing a few good punches on the Emperor, Luffy would force Kaido to go all out in order to finally deal with him. With a Thunder Bagua hitting his head at full force, Luffy would find himself slowly bleeding to death. However, he would keep fighting despite everything until he eventually passes out from his injuries. Bleeding out, Luffy would close his eyes and smile, happy that he fought for justice until the end. However, just as Kaido prepares to deliver the final blow, Fujitora and Zoro would jump in to parry his attack. The two of them would then try to fight Kaido, but they would quickly start losing because of their injuries from the previous battles. Just as all hope seems lost, everyone on the battlefield would suddenly start hearing the drums of liberation as Luffy emerges in his Nika form. While Kaido tries to figure out what's going on, Luffy would quickly take Fujitora and Zoro off the battlefield. Thanking them for their help, Luffy would quickly appear in front of Kaido and punch him straight in the face. Landing even more punches, now amplified by the power of Gear 5, Luffy would easily defeat Kaido, splitting the entire Onigashima in two with his final punch. With the entire island sinking, the Marines would arrest as many beast pirates as they can before retreating back to the shore. Following this event, Luffy would gain the nickname Hero of the Marines, just like his grandfather. He and his team would then vow to bring down every last pirate on the sea until the world becomes a safer place for innocent civilians. With Garp's and Fujitora's support, Luffy would then start planning missions to attack other emperors like Blackbeard, Big Mom, and even Shanks. No one would be safe from the might of Admiral Luffy, and he would eventually go down in history as the strongest Marine ever. Click on this video next, where I explain what would have happened if everyone Luffy defeated actually joined the crew. Go on, click it.